Howdy YouTube pards, Jack Spade here again, High Noon Leatherworks, coming back at you with another episode on the Uncle Henry Schrade knife sheath. And today we're going to do some dyeing, and I'm going to get into how to glue, how I do gluing before I do my stitching. Because I've got 3 thicknesses on this knife sheath of leather instead of 2, which is normally what I've done when I've done the stitching. So it's a little bit different. So I'll bring you up in a little closer and we'll get started. Alright, so today we're going to do some dyeing on this knife sheath. And again, I have, the last episode I talked about how I hand carved the logo for the Bell Life. That's who I'm doing this for. Gonna send it to those guys, YouTubers. And I talked about doing some painting of black dye in the background where it's flattened out. But this lettering is so small that the least little bit of bleeding on that dye would go up into those letters because they're so small. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to stay away from that. Just make it one color. The backgrounding tool will make it kind of look two-tone. So we'll see how that turns out. But that's the front piece. This is the piece that goes in between the front and the back, the spacer. And that's going to keep that knife blade itself from cutting the stitches going in and out. And then this is the back, and that's what's going to make my loop for my belt. So today we're going to dye, and then what I'll do is I'll shut the camera off, I'll let that dry, then I'll come back and finish the gluing. So let's go ahead and get started and get some gloves. Again, you get just a little bit of this dye, any part of this dye on you, and it will not come off. It'll wear off eventually, but it's not just going to wash off. So I believe this Fibings dye that I like to use, if I'm correct, I believe it's alcohol based, so it does dry fairly fast. And I am using buckskin today, so it is a little bit different color than I've used on the channel in the past. Again, I do use those small throwaway containers from the dollar store, and I don't replace what I don't use out of my container back in my original Fibings container because I don't want to contaminate it with anything. So I got my wool dauber, and some of you may notice that I do have a new piece of cardboard for dyeing. I still have my old one that's got all the dye all over it, but I cut out some smaller pieces. Sometimes that large piece, if you're not doing a holster or something that big, you don't need that large a piece of cardboard. So I'll wipe the excess off. And I believe it's probably going to be better not to have put that black background in there. Let me get it where you can see the, I think when that dries, that's going to look really good. So go ahead and do the edges. All the way around. Come back the other direction. And since the last episode, I did bevel my edges and burnished them. So that's finished, ready to go. And I also marked on these pieces, and this is on the back where you're not going to be able to see it. You see those lines that go around there? That's just an ink pen line, and of course that'll be down, you won't see it because that'll be on the inside. But those lines were drawn from this, and that's that spacer, so that I know where to put my glue. I don't want glue outside of that line. So I'll set the front, it's coated, I'll set it off to the side. We'll do the next piece, which is the back. And that front piece may come out, we'll see when it dries, but it may come out a little bit darker than the rest of this because it was, it may not have been 100% dry. So it may have had a little moisture in it, but as it dries it should lighten up quite a bit. And again, you can buy these dies and the daubers and all the tools that you see me use. You can buy that from Tandy Leather. And I've tried some other things online or whatever, but I prefer Tandy. They just always have good quality stuff, and it seems like that helps me get a good quality product every time. So I like to stay with them. And it seems like I can always trust their leather. Alright, so I'll turn this up, do the edge. It's a pretty long edge. Again, that makes real nice with those gloves on. And I like to go both directions. Go clockwise the first coat, come back counterclockwise the second coat. And what that does, that gets any of that leather that's been roughed up or didn't get perfectly smoothed out. It helps soak that leather in there so that you get good even coverage, or soak the dye into the leather, sorry. And this piece back here being the back, it'll really soak up the leather, or soak up the dye, because it's the rough side. I've talked about that before in previous videos, about how the rough side normally really soaks up the dye compared to the finished side. Alright, so the back piece is done. So we'll set it aside, and then we'll do the spacer. Now, I did not bevel the edges on the spacer or burnish the edges, because I really want that to be square on the edge so that it really fills up that center between the front and the back piece. And you're really not going to see the edges of this. I might do a little more finish burnishing once I get the piece sewed together, all three pieces. I might do a little bit of finish burnishing, and what that'll do is that'll help seal the edge, but it'll also give the appearance that there's not three pieces of leather there. So I try to make sure that I don't bevel or burnish my center spacing piece, because I don't want it taken up. I don't want it sticking out where you can really see it. I want it to blend in, and I think the best way to do that is to leave that, have a square edge, and then I'm going to need just a little bit more of the buckskin dye on that piece, because I don't want it being lighter than the other two pieces, or it will stick out like a sore thumb. So I'll put a little more on there. That'll darken that up a little bit so it's more the color of the other two pieces. You can see those a little darker than what this is at this point, but as I spread that second coat on there, it'll darken up. And again, as it dries, it will lighten somewhat. Definitely want to get the edges on the second coat. Inside and outside, the tops. That'll really help blend that in. The inside, obviously, you're not going to see. as much as the outside, but I want to make sure we get that outside coated really good both directions. And then there's the spacer. There's the outside edge. So we'll let these dry, and then I'll come back and we'll start the gluing process. So stay tuned. Alright, back. The leather is dried from the dye. Turned out pretty good. And now I'm going to go ahead and do my gluing so I can go on getting prepared for the next video, which is going to be drilling and stitching. Remember, I said I was going to do this one a little bit different than I have the ones in the projects in the past. So you want to stay tuned for that next one so that you see something a little different you haven't seen before on this channel. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a scrap piece of leather, and let me trim it up here. And all I'm going to do is just take a little scrap piece of leather, and that's what I'm going to use as an applicator for my glue. And the type of glue that I'm using is just a contact cement. So I'll coat both pieces and then I'll let that dry. You just let it dry for a few seconds, at least this type that I use. So you do both pieces, and then you apply the pieces together, and that's going to hold that so that once we get using the drill press, a small drill press, to drill the holes around for that I've got marked here for my stitching line, then those pieces won't move. So you don't have to worry about holding them together. You can concentrate on drilling a good straight hole. So I'll take these two pieces first, which is my front piece that has the carving on it, and I've got a line I showed earlier around there so I know where to keep the glue. And then this one, the spacer piece, will go on like so. So I'll have to coat the face of it. So I'll coat both pieces, and I am using Gorilla Glue, and it's called Clear Grip Contact Adhesive, and basically it's just their version of contact cement. And like I said, I've used it before, and it works really well. And then what I normally do is I'll just spread a little bit on the piece using the applicator or the tube. And the key is not to get too much. You can always add more. but don't get too much on there when you're first applying it. Then I'll take my homemade scrap leather spatula, and the reason I like to use this is I can get right up to that line that I've marked on there. I know that's hard to see in the camera, but I'll show it to you as soon as I get this. And basically you just kind of use that to smear the glue around, and I keep it within that line that I put on there as a guideline. And you'll be able to see this, I think, once I get this smeared around. And these little scrap pieces of leather, instead of throwing them away, then you can use them to apply your glue. Just repurpose it so you don't have to just throw it in the trash and never use that scrap piece of leather. And so I very rarely throw away pieces of scrap leather. If I do, they're normally so small and cut up they're not even going to be good for this. So I try to use all of my leather that I possibly can. And then let me hold this up to the camera, and you can see the glue around from that line to the outside edge. And again, we'll let that sit, and I'll continue to glue the spacer piece. Again, we don't need a ton of glue, so I'll just put a very, very small amount on that spacer piece. Then I'll use my spatula to spread it out just like I did on the first piece. Now this one, you don't have to worry about going up to a line, but you want to be careful not to drag the glue too far over the outside edge, which is around here, because that's what's going to be visible to the customer. So and you may get some that goes on the outside edge. If it does, you can pull it right off, especially if you wait just a couple of minutes, and it'll dry to a real rubbery consistency, and you can just peel it right off of there. Probably best to get it off of there the sooner the better, not leave it on there too long. And you have to move pretty quick with this, because it'll want to set up on you pretty quickly. And that's already, the inside of the front piece is already starting to set up pretty good. And this is already getting tacky. So what I'll do is, you have to be pretty quick when you're putting these together, because it's going to want to stick on contact. So on a piece like this, you're going to want to make sure that you're very careful about putting it on. And make sure you get it exactly where you want it to go. Because once that contact cement sets up and they bond together, you're not going to want to try to peel all that apart. That would definitely make a mess. So you just work your way around, pushing them together, trying to keep all those edges straight with one another all the way around the outside. Then you can take your mallet I like to go around and tap, keep it as flat as possible. And I like to tap all the way around. Make sure that that contact cement has made 100% contact all the way around where we glued it. And then you can see how close I can get our glued edge all the way around. Now obviously once this sets up and we use our small drill press and we drill holes through it and stitch it, it's not going to come apart at all. Just make it that much stronger. But when you bond these pieces together, it just makes everything that much stronger. And let's lay our knife in there and see how it fits. Fits perfect. It's all the way down to the hand guard that touches the front. It's at the bottom, the blade's at the bottom. And we do have some room on each side of the blade for that spacer, so that should make our knife slide in and out easily. Even though it has that curved point at the end, that should allow that knife to slide in and out of there very easily. Now we will have a hold down strap on that. Once we get this sewed and put together, we'll go back and put a hold down strap because we'll know exactly where it needs to be on the back part of the sheath where the handle is, but we won't know exactly where we need that. We could guess right now, but I like to wait until I know exactly where that hold down strap needs to be. So normally I'll put it around the top part of the handle up here, and this handle does have hand grooves in it, finger grooves. I don't know, you can see the finger grooves in it, but where you grip it, so that will help putting a hold down strap around that top finger groove, and that'll keep the knife from pulling out or want to come out of the sheath. So that's how long it takes to do that. That one's already set up, ready to go. So next step is I'll clean off some of the contact cement off of my applicator, and again, you just pull it off. It basically just feels like rubber. And then I've got the back marked also. You can see my faint line on here. And I'll do the same thing. I'll come back with my contact cement. Stay between the line and the outside edge. Try not to let any contact cement cross either the line or the edge. I do try to put my cap back on pretty quickly because it does want to try to dry out. Then I'll go around with my homemade leather spatula and make sure that I have contact cement from my line all the way out to the edge, but not protruding over the edge. You definitely don't want your contact cement dripping over the outside edge. And this cement is already wanting to stiffen up, so you don't have a lot of time to dilly-dally around. You have to really get after it. And if you do get some on the edge, turn your piece of scrap leather that you used as a spatula over on its side and just go around the edge. Get that excess off. It's not a total catastrophe. I'll set that aside, come back and do the spacer on the rough side. It's going to come in contact with the back. It's hard to do this on camera and not get my hands in the way so you guys can see. Sorry if I covered it up. Hold it so it doesn't move. Go ahead and make sure that I put my lid back on nice and tight so my air can't get to it. I always also keep mine in a plastic Ziploc bag. It keeps air away from it. Clean my spatula off again. And then I'm ready to spread that on the face of my spacer. Obviously the spacer doesn't take near as long to spread it out because you're not as concerned about the excess. just don't want to roll it over the edge and have it on the outside, just like when we did the other side of the spacer. We'll switch hands. See if I can do this left-handed so you can see it in the camera better. And if you get any of it on the edge, clean it off, excess off with your side of your scraper, your spatula. You can see it. You see the shine on it. On the outside edge, that's the glue. And then we can go ahead and take the back side and the front side. We want to match those up perfect as possible. We've got 3 thicknesses of leather now. And when I tap this one down, I'm going to tap it from the back side because I don't want to mess up any of my carving. And I just want to tap down the edge. I don't want to get in that middle part where the blade's going to go. And again, if you did end up getting any contact cement that squirts out the edge, you can take your finger and you can rub that and it'll ball right up, come right off. Because you may have some try to squirt out a little bit as you tap on it. The key is just take your time, get any of that off of there. And that's why you definitely want to dye your leather before you do any gluing, because any residue of that contact cement, that glue, and dye is not going to pass through that, so it will mess up your dye job. So you want to make sure that you do all your dyeing before. And then the next step is I want to take a couple of let's see, I could take a couple of pieces of wood and use some clamps, put one piece of wood on top, one on the bottom, and clamp it together. And I normally let that dry overnight just to make sure before I take it to the drill press. But I think what I'll do, and I've done this before, but I think I'll take another piece of leather that's that thickness, lay it here across the back part where my strap's going to go, and I'm going to take my quartz piece that I do all my stamping on, and I'm going to turn that over smooth side down on top of that, and that'll keep weight pressed down on that. I tell you what I'm going to do also is take another piece of leather and put it across my front, and also let it hang over that extra piece I put on the back. And the only reason I'm doing that is so this quartz doesn't sit on there at an angle. It sits as flat as possible. And then I'm going to put this piece on there so that I have a smooth piece against a smooth piece, and this quartz isn't sitting directly on top of my finished carved image. So just lightly set that on there, and I'll just let the weight of that, which is pretty heavy, I'll let the weight of that sit on that overnight. And what that'll do is it'll really compress those pieces together where I've put the contact seam in. So we've got that part done. And come back for the next episode, and we'll be putting it in the small drill press and actually drilling each and every hole for our stitching. It's best to do that, I found out, because you've got 3 thicknesses of leather, and it's tough enough to pull and needle through 2 of those thicknesses of that leather, let alone 3. So it'll cut way back on the physical strength that you need. It'll be much easier for that needle to pass through those holes. And when you come back for the next episode, that's what we'll be doing. So make sure you come back, check it out, and I hope you enjoyed this one. And we're getting closer to getting the knife sheath project done. So like I always say, please like, share, and subscribe. Thanks.